warm welcome to Landmark Case Analysis, which is presented to you by LawSeco. This is Ankita Parida here. Let's proceed with today's discussion on the case Swiss Riven Private Limited versus Union of India. This case is a landmark judgment on the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. It was delivered by the Honorable Supreme Court of India on 25th Jan 2019 by a two-judge bench consisting of Honorable Justice R.F. Nariman and Honorable Justice Navin Sinha. Let's discuss the issue of law. So the first issue is whether classification between financial creditors and the operational creditors is violative of Article 14, whether Section 7, Section 12A, Section 29A and Section 53 of the Code are valid, and whether a resolution professional has been given power to adjudicate. Now let's look at the brief facts. The Section 7 of the Code distinguishes between financial creditor and operational creditor, which was unwelcome by the appellant as it put operational creditor in a disadvantageous position by positioning operational creditors below others, and thus making it difficult for them to recover their money from the non-performing assets. Section 53 kept the operational creditors out of the committee of creditor. It kept the operational creditor away from the decision-making process also. So let's see what is Section 7 and Section 53 of IBC. Section 7 says initiation of corporate insolvency resolution process by financial creditor. So basically, a financial creditor is the only entity which can initiate an insolvency resolution process, and not a operational creditor is allowed to do this job. So operational creditors have this contention that they also provide resources for the smooth functioning of the company. However, they are not accounted at the same footage along with the financial creditors, and therefore they cannot initiate the corporate insolvency process. Secondly, Section 53 talks about liquidation process. It talks about the importance of each segment, which has helped the organization in smooth running, and it has kept the financial creditors at the top and the operational creditors at the bottom. Also, Section 53 kept the operational creditor out of the committee of creditors. It kept the operational creditors away from decision-making process. Section 12A of the code was contended by a group of appellant as the requirement of approval of 90% of the members of committee of creditors to allow withdrawal of corporate debtor from the corporate insolvency resolution process made the resolution process slow. So, Section 12A says that Section 12A of the Code provides that the adjudicating authority may allow the withdrawal of application admitted under Section 7, 9 and 10 on the application made by the applicant with the approval of 90% voting share of the committee of creditors. So, suppose a company has turned into a non-performing asset and it has taken loan of 100 crores from a bank, but in a time period of 6 months, let's say, it has been able to repay some of its loan, and it has negotiated with the financial creditors that let me withdraw from this resolution process. Then in that case, committee of creditors have to be consulted, and 90% of the voting should be in the favor of this resolution proposal. Then only the applicant can apply and it can be passed. However, it is alleged by the applicants that appellants that the approval of 90% is a very huge threshold, which is very difficult to achieve sometimes, and it also delays the process. So moving ahead, reasoning and decision of the court. The first issue here is arbitrariness in differentiating between financial creditor and operational creditor. Section 7 of the code was challenged for the fact that there is no intelligible differential between financial and operational creditor in the code. Regard being had been objected. So it says that though there has been no intelligible differential between the operational creditor and financial creditor given in the code, however, they are not treated at par in practical practices. In this regard, the Supreme Court has said that it has referred to the BLRC report and the bill, and also it has identified the differences. It says there are various differences, and for the first time, it has given a general definition to the operational creditors. It has identified that financial creditors are generally secured. Their nature of loans are in terms of credit, capital loans, term loans. Also, the financial creditors can access the viability of the corporate debtor, and also their all the transactions are stored in electronic format, whereas the operational creditors are generally unsecured, and their all the agreements are in the form of contract with the creditor, and also their records are not generally recorded in electronic format. The court also found the support for differentiation between financial and operation creditor basis the fact that a financial creditor has to prove default, whereas the operational creditor merely claims a right to payment of a liability or a obligation. So when somebody is defaulting, then the financial creditor has to prove him as a defaulter, whereas the operational creditor just has claims, and it claims from the its liabilities from the debtor. The court also held that the financial creditors are being in the business of money lending, they are best equipped to access the viability and feasibility of the corporate debtor. However, the operational creditors are not having the requisite expertise and the technical, economic valuation analysis expertise. So it is there is a huge difference between financial and operational creditors. Also, Supreme Court noted that operational creditors can be a representative in a committee of creditors only when the amount which is due with them is not less than 10% of the debt. So this was the first time Supreme Court had clearly defined an operational creditor. The second contention was that, as per section 53 of the code, the position of the operational creditor is below the rank of all other creditors. Regarding this, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of section 53 of code. It dwelled into the nature of debts, observing that repayment of financial debts infuses capital into income economy, and basically the money which is given in loan amount, and which is again recovered by the resolution process, it is again flushed into economy by lending it to the other entrepreneurs or other economic activities. Whereas the operational creditors, in case of operational creditors, it doesn't happen the same way. Therefore, there is a clear distinction, and if this provision of section 53 is held unconstitutional, then the whole objective of IBC of the speedy resolution process will be diluted. Next, we have legality of settlement under section 12A of the code. Section 12A of the code was assailed as a prescribes a very high threshold, as we discussed. The 90% approval of the committee of creditors has to be there to allow withdrawal. In this regard, the Supreme Court says that, look, if 90% of the members of committee of creditor ensure that this is a right decision, then it will ensure the that the all the financial creditors are equivalently compensated, and all their problems will be addressed equally. However, if we don't keep a high threshold, then somebody's interest will be fulfilled, but somebody's will be lacked. So therefore this high threshold is very much required, and it is very much in consonance with the objective of IBC. And also the Supreme Court stated that this decision of Committee of Creditors is not final, and one can also appeal to the NCLT under section 60 of the code, and therefore the Committee of Creditor does not have last say in the subject. Now moving to section 29A of the code, it was argued that Section 29A of the code had retrospectively impaired the right of erstwhile promoter to participate in the recovery process for the corporate debtor. So it says that basically, if somebody has in the beginning of the inception of the company, for example, have come together some people, and later they are not so much engaged in the process of the running of the company. However, when they see that some resolution process is going on and they want to again participate, they are restricted, and there is a blanket ban on that the promoters and the relative parties cannot participate in the resolution process. So this was said that applies on retrospectively, and it is therefore acting as a disadvantage. However, in this context, Supreme Court observed that it is not retrospective merely because it affects existing rights, noting that the resolution application has no vested right for consideration or approval of its resolution plan. The court noted that Section 29A is not retrospective in nature. Next, Section 29A subsection C, not restricted to malfeasance. It was argued that there is no reason to not permit an erstwhile manager not guilty of malfeasance or of acting contrary to the interest of the corporate debtor from taking part in the resolution process. So basically, it says that this provision does not differentiate between an innocent manager or an innocent promoter from a malified intended manager or a director. So this provision is not helping a innocent manager who is not guilty of the malfeasance, and also he cannot participate because of this provision. In this regard, the Supreme Court says that Supreme Court, while reiterating the absence of the vested right of an erstwhile promoter of a corporate debtor to bid for property of the corporate debtor, clarified that malfeasance was not the only ground for disqualification under Section 29A of the Code, as Section 29A prescribed other grounds on the basis of which person could be ineligible to submit a resolution plan. Hence, there is no question for treating unequals as equals. Further, it also alleged that because there is no distinction between a innocent manager and a malified intended manager, the innocent manager should not be prevented from purchasing the properties sold by liquidator by way of public auction. So it was completely denied by the Supreme Court, and this provision, if allowed, will completely dilute the objective of IBC, and therefore it upheld the constitutionality of 29A. Then the contention was regarding related party. It tells that mere fact that somebody happens to be a relative of an ineligible person cannot be a good enough reason to oust such person from becoming a resolution applicant if he is otherwise qualified. So he says that if somebody is just a mere relative of a promoter or a manager, then it does not mean that he also have malified intention, and he should not be allowed to give a resolution plan or participate in it. In this, Supreme Court very well says that relative content in the definition section must be read with categories or person mentioned in explanation I, which could include only person who are connected with business activities. So it says only person who are connected with the business activities and have a vested interest in it are called connected person, and they are only not allowed in the resolution applicant as a resolution applicant. However, the court held that the absence of showing that such person is connected with the business of the resolution applicant cannot disqualify such person under section 29A subsection J. Further, the powers of a resolution professional. Whether a resolution professional being a non-adjudicatory authority under the code has been given powers of adjudication. So it says that the in as a resolution professional, or she should not be the adjudicatory authority, but rather they are the administrative authorities. The Supreme Court here clarified that resolution professionals are given administrative powers as opposed to quasi-judicial powers. The Supreme Court has comparatively analyzed the extent of power as a resolution professional related that to a liquidator. So basically the power of resolution professional is relating to a liquidator and not a quasi-judicial authority. So that's all for today. Thank you so much.